I don't know what's going on in Moorhead, but do either of you have thoughts on those examples of places they're doing environmental review? Everything's fine there.
Moorhead literally was 3 AUARs of specific projects that was included in the comp plan. So this is again like where it's like people don't know what they're talking about, but they like know enough to like weaponize it, right? Which is like, well, Moorhead used an AUAR, and it's like, no, Moorhead included existing AUARs in their comprehensive plan.
We're rolling. We're rolling.
This is a real thing. Real thing.
None of you have the balls to stop this. Stop this.
I've got plenty of time. I have nothing else going on today.
We're in the Wedge neighborhood right now.
I missed a real opportunity to wear the sweatshirt I bought from your Etsy because instead I wore this like skating one. I know how much you love my hobbies, John.
This is my chance to scold you because you like, I need Wedge Live merch. I think you had watched a YouTube video and you're like, oh, in this moment, I really love Wedge Live and I feel gratitude.
It wasn't even that. It was an ambient thought I had in my brain, which was, I always think about how I need another crew neck. I'm constantly thinking about having 800 crew neck sweatshirts. And I was like, a crew neck sweatshirt that I would love to have would be a Wedge Live crew neck sweatshirt. So then I opened up the app and I saw you didn't have a single sweatshirt. So I said, please make me a sweatshirt. And then,
here's where things went wrong, though. You used...
I
set up this Etsy listing for a product specifically for Peggy Sue. I send her the link, and you know what she does? She buys it through an ad.
I didn't buy it through an ad.
She opens the link, looks at it, goes away, waits to purchase it when she has served an ad. And you know what Etsy does when you buy through an ad link? I get charged 15% I get charged, which is higher than my profit margin.
Okay, first of all,
you're ruining me. Why do I even have a store?
This is such slander. Okay, let me tell you what happened. 2 things. First of all, I forgot to buy the sweatshirt. But then the second thing is Alex tie-in. Alex was wearing a bus hat, and I said, that is a great reminder that I need to buy this sweatshirt because he's wearing a bus lanes hat, and I complimented him on it on a Zoom call that we were on.
He goes directly to the store. He doesn't wait to buy it.
I did. I typed in Etsy.com, and then I typed in Wedge Live, and I purchased from Etsy. I did not get served an ad. I typed it in. Now, however it showed up in Etsy, maybe it was an ad inside Etsy. Like, I don't know if you're doing inside Etsy advertising.
I have no ads. Etsy is doing this against my will.
So I'm saying that we're whistleblowers. We have discovered that Etsy is scamming small businesses by lying to them about which purchases come from ads. Because I can tell you with factual certainty, I watched Alex wear that hat. I typed it into Google. I ordered the sweatshirt. So
okay.
You should make a claim to Etsy. And second thing, I said I will give you $5. I said, send me your Venmo. I will give you fucking $5.
It's okay. Peggy Sue is ruining me at Wedge Live. I'm in the red, and patreon.com/Wedge Live to make up for the deep hole she's digging for me on Etsy. Subscribe to the Patreon, please. Patreon.com/Wedge Live. This is the Wedge Live podcast. I'm your host, John Edwards. I'm joined by PeggySue Imihy Bean, president of the Minnesota chapter of the American Planning Association. Do I have that right?
That's the only title we're going to use today, John. It's the only one.
Yeah, the only one. And Alex Schieferdecker, who is also a planner. I don't know where you work, Alex. I believe you're in the private sector. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah.
And you're not representing anyone here but yourself.
Also correct.
Same.
We're here to talk about a much discussed Wedge Live topic, the bad faith lawsuit that has halted for now the implementation of the Minneapolis 2040 plan, weaponizing environmental law here in Minnesota. Peggy Sue, you wrote a thing in the Star Tribune saying, from an urban planning perspective, 2040 dispute is mystifying, worrisome. Did you write that headline?
No, they wrote that for us, which was a great headline. Shout out to whoever was the editor for that. I mean, I think it's probably good content that if you're about to listen to this and you've never heard of this
Yes.
before, like pause,
Yeah.
hit pause, Google this, read the Star Trib article. That is important context. Because then we can just go deeper dive, right?
Yeah.
We can.
It's a
that's as a
three-minute
baseline.
read. PeggySue Imihy Bean, from an urban planning perspective, 2040 dispute is mystifying, worrisome. So the most common question people ask about this is, why didn't the city just cut this short years ago, do the environmental review, get it over with? We wouldn't have had all this drama for all these years if the city had just done the environmental review on the 2040 plan. Like, why is that a dumb or uninformed question?
So the first reason is that a comprehensive plan is an environmental review, right? That it is of itself an environmental review. So it takes in a handful of wide-ranging things, whether that's transportation analysis, stormwater, surface water, like density, all those things, and plans for growth. That is why we do comprehensive planning, right? It assumes that cities will either grow or shrink, right? We'll have more or less need for housing. We'll have more or less need for transportation, whether that's like infrastructure, like transit, cars, all of that, and says every 10 years, cities should plan for this. And so as a document on the whole, one, it is not a development proposal, right? It is just like the community gets together, and in most cities, like so all cities across the metro, there's some engagement process, right? Like the Met Council hands you numbers, right? They hand you TAZs, they hand you your density requirements, they hand you your affordable housing requirements, and they say, figure this out, right? Like figure out where you're going to put these people. And then community stakeholders are included, right? Your planning commissions, council members, residents. Like it is like Minneapolis, you probably saw a million opportunities if you were a Minneapolis resident to be involved, whether that was info sessions or pop-ups at open streets or farmers markets or direct mailers. So communities do this to varying levels. You know, a lot of communities will have comp plan events where they're asking you to come, and some communities are really great at this. Like they're really fun events, right? Where you're like coming and like, you know, some cities will do poetry where you're like making poetry and talking about what your city looks like. Some cities will do, you know, block diagrams or like coloring sheets for kids, right? There's so many ways to imagine and envision what your community looks like. So a lot of these plans are named something like sort of silly, like envision, you know, whatever, or like cultivate whatever, you know, like they're meant to be this like big picture, like imaginatory experience for residents to be involved in and participate in and guide the vision of the city. So this is not a plan that gets like me and Alex as planners are like behind our computer, like thinking about how to destroy your community. A lot of times it's something that like residents are really, really actively engaged in.
Especially in Minneapolis, it's a political document. It's a very politicized, heavily debated. Lots of people have looked at it, especially when it's something like the Minneapolis 2040 plan. Nothing had more eyeballs on it than this plan.
And it's an environmental document. It's required by law to have environmental content. It's required by law to plan for growth in a sustainable way.
And the legislature last session took it one step further, right? They said, actually, there should be a climate component to this, right? Every city should be adding some sort of climate component to this. And so like I sit on a working group, which like shout out Eric Wycheck, Icon. He's like organizing this and trying to figure out next comp plan cycle, what does that look like? How do we include climate in this comp plan, right? Because like so many environmental factors are already included. How do we take it one step further? So that was something that passed through the legislature last year and made that change to the comprehensive planning process. So that's like step one, right? This is an environmental document that like is seen and created by both planning professionals, engineers, like water resource engineers, like so many technical experts, but really informed like at its heart by community, right? And you'll see that, like, if you look at comp plans other than Minneapolis's and you look at, like, a Roseville, a Richfield, Golden Valley, whatever that is, like, you're going to see even, like, really small communities are required to do this, right? Like, Long Lake, Sunfish Lake, like, these tiny communities. Everyone has to do this. You're going to see community sentiment throughout all of those places, right? And that is, like, informs that. So, again, it's not just, like, technical experts But it is a lot of technical experts, right? Thinking about like your housing numbers in this document, right, are tied directly to like the transportation section and like how will you physically get people there, right? Your land use designations are tied again like to these transportation things, and that impacts later sections of your plan around stormwater and wastewater, right? We don't do this plan just for housing. Right, that's a really important component, which is getting a little lost here. Is like we don't do comprehensive plans just to plan for density. We do this for municipal like services, including like streets, but also like literally where you pee and shit. We have to plan for that. Like we have to have enough capacity for sewer. And so it requires this comprehensive planning effort, right? We're going to grow. People are going to pee and shit more.
Can the president of the Minnesota chapter of the American Planning Association say pee and shit repeatedly on my podcast?
I don't know. It's your podcast. But like, I mean, it's not like this is not the like cute, fun part of comp plans, but like it is a core component of them, right? Is that like people use the bathroom and we need to have enough capacity for that.
Right.
I think we've
so
already
your point is that human beings adding population is pollution because they're pooping and peeing everywhere.
Well,
no.
The comprehensive plan is an environmental document, as PeggySue was saying, and the other half of that is that an environmental review of the type that the court has said Minneapolis must do, a EIS or an AUAR, is a document that is not suited to evaluating a comprehensive plan. I mean, I think we sort of talked this over the last time I was on this podcast, certainly to talk about the issue, right? These are environmental reviews that are predicated on the idea of we have a discrete project. We have, limits of soil disturbance. We have we know what its height is going to be. We know what the materials it's going to be using are. And when you have that information, then you can do a deep dive if necessary. If you're building something that might injure the environment, you can do a deep dive on soil conditions. You can model stormwater runoff. You can, model traffic from the new development. You can do all these types of things, but to apply it to a comprehensive plan, number one, a comprehensive plan is totally speculative. We don't know if the growth is going to come yet. We don't know if the buildings are going to be built. It's just if they are, here's how they should look. And then a comprehensive plan is totally site unspecific. The development could come in the form of 150,000 triplexes, or it could come in the form of just a bunch of large buildings downtown. We don't know. And then these speculative elements of the plan. Oh, and then what PeggySue was mentioning earlier, which is that the plan is holistic, right? What is so confounding about this lawsuit and the whole discourse about this is it's focused entirely on the residential development, and especially the small-scale residential development part of the plan, with almost no acknowledgement of the fact that the comprehensive plan deals with stormwater. It has a stormwater section. It deals with traffic. There's the Transportation Action Plan, which is a direct outgrowth of the 2040 plan. And so what the court has basically asked the city to do is you make orange juice out of apples, right? It can't be done. These are two completely different types of documents, and they don't go together. And the court has offered no indication that it understands this confusion. It has offered no guidance for what the city of Minneapolis or any other city that's caught in this issue should do to evaluate a comp plan according to the strictures of MIRA. And so you asked at the beginning, why can't the city just do an environmental review? I mean, I guess they could try to do a high-level environmental assessment of the plan, but it would already be mostly what's in the comprehensive plan itself. And there's no guarantee after the city spent time and money doing this that what they had done would satisfy either the plaintiffs. I mean, it would not satisfy the plaintiffs because they want to hear an answer that's not true. But there's no guarantee it would satisfy the judge in this case because the judge has offered no guidance as to what would satisfy him besides suggesting an EIS or an AUAR, which are not applicable.
I would just jump in on 2 points. One point being that, like, comp plans at this point, because of the market conditions, are not happening. The development is not happening in the way that you would expect it to have been, right? Like, because interest rates are so high, right? Cities have projects that like are like just waiting on developers to get financing because interest rates are so high. And so that's a core component of this, right? Is like we build these and we imagine what they look like, but then we do them every 10 years because conditions change, right? Areas or neighborhoods become more popular or less popular. And so we have to have that like flux and transition. And so that is again, like these are just guidance. They're saying like, if this happens, this is where it might happen. And so I think that that's just like really challenging to guess. And this is what we contend a lot with, like, as we testify in the legislature on the change to MIRA, is that like, it's a guess, and we could guess, but we will likely be wrong. And the city of Minneapolis is, is the largest city, right, in the state of Minnesota. They have a much larger tax base than the city of Lauderdale, right? And so asking them, and they have a huge staff, they have many resources at the ready to like maybe make a guess. And to Alex's point, like, who knows if a judge would even accept that guess, right? Especially if the answer they're looking for is like, just build less housing. But many communities don't have those resources. And so our interest as the Planning Association is far less about Minneapolis. And the change to MIRA at the legislature is 0% about Minneapolis. Honestly, as a Minneapolis resident, is this how I want my tax dollars spent? Like, no, absolutely not. But for communities in the 7-county metro that are not Minneapolis, this is so expensive. And like the idea that like you're a city that has no planners, 0 planners, which exists in the metro area. You have a consultant planner, and then you need to hire like a giant team of consultants to guess at what your comp plan's environmental impact might be through using a tool that's not meant to measure comp plans is extremely expensive. So
more than the cost, it feels like in that scenario, cities and suburbs will be incredibly cautious. They will not put anything politically provocative, anything risky. They won't be bold. They won't actually plan for the future. They're just planning for the most outrageous NIMBY lawsuit they can conceive of. And isn't that what the actual outcome is? It's not going to cost cities a lot of money. Cities will just be planning in such a cautious way as to save themselves this money.
I think that that's a key point. The legislature, the intent of the legislature when passing the Metropolitan Land Planning Act, which is the law that mandates decennial comprehensive plans in the 7-county metro, was to get communities to plan for growth. Now a court has said, if you plan for growth, any growth, basically, you are going to, you might, if one citizen complains and files a claim under MIRA, then you will be responsible for completing this onerous environmental document that does not fit the comprehensive plan at all. So aside from the confusion about the mismatched documents, what you have here is planners and municipalities throughout the metropolitan area who will be forced to choose, do I obey the law, Metropolitan Land Planning Act, as it has been understood for 50 years, or do I try to sneak one past the Met Council and sneak one past the Metropolitan Land Planning Act and plan as little as possible so that I can appease, the loudest NIMBY. And I think that the only possible way between those two rocks, basically, is for planners and municipalities to identify the poorest and least engaged people in their communities and to give them all of the new development, because they know that if they put the development, or if they plan in an equitable way, if they plan for development in throughout the community, in the Minneapolis context, Ward 13, they're going to get these same people who have filed this lawsuit on their backs. But, which ward has the lowest voter turnout. Let's zone for a lot more housing there. Because
that's how it currently works. A lot of places do this already. It's just reinforcing what the natural tendency, path of least resistance, the way we zone.
I would say a lot of that is certainly that is the landscape of power that government action is mapped onto, but certainly, I'll defend planners here. That is not good planning practice, and that's the kind of thing that planners are trained to think about and try to avoid. Now, we don't control city councils, where in many cases work as city staff. So, there are communities that are good and bad actors on this, without a doubt. But all of the incentives will point in one direction if this precedent is upheld and there's no action. The logic is very clear. The only way to comply with the growth recommendations that the Met Council will give communities, and that they're legally required to plan for, is to pick the people who are least likely to sue. And those are the people who are going to be writing the comprehensive plans in the next cycle under this precedent.
But I think one thing I would add too is it's not just about that, which I will also defend planners and say, I hope that's not what people in our profession are doing. I think you are very close to something, John, which is that the vision that comes with certain types of development are now riskier for communities, right, until this is fixed. And so for communities that want to revitalize a downtown or a large industrial site that that could hold, is 40, 50, 60 acres and can hold this a really cool, dense urban development, are now at risk for that one angry person who says, I preferred, the warehouse. I preferred cold storage, right? And so, when you look at even places like Maple Grove, right, that are doing whole scale, really giant development, that is super cool, providing many necessary services, is that bridge to the Twin Cities for people in St. Cloud or, even further, Rogers, Buffalo. And you're doing these really big developments that maybe have a housing component in them. The one guy who says, I like gravel mining, I'm going to sue, can sue, right? And say, housing doesn't belong there. And so that is where I think it's really unfortunate, especially as people think about, the pandemic changed so many patterns for people. And I think that's why we've seen communities that have some of these more urban downtowns or even more walkable neighborhoods really flourish, as people want that style of development. And so I think cities are constantly contending with how to build that, how to create that, how to make more walkable neighborhoods and then places that people really want to be, and that requires housing, right? It's a common term, rooftop spring retail. And so people tend to add housing into these types of developments, and that is where, something like Heart of the City or Hopkins Main Street, want to have these housing developments and are now at risk of that being not a thing that planners want to risk putting into plans or want to not put in at the scale that they would like to see it at.
Let's talk about a couple of things from that recent Star Tribune article written by Susan Dew, I think. She threw out the Moorhead, Minnesota example and the Seattle example. I looked into what's going on in Washington State, and it's not as though it's all flowers and roses in Washington State, and that no one is weaponizing environmental law against planning. I think they have grappled with that too. I don't know what's going on in Moorhead, but do either of you have thoughts on those examples of places that they're doing environmental review? Everything's fine there.
Well, I'll start with Washington, which is that the state of Washington has an entire process for this, right? An established process that already is in existence to do this. And am I familiar with it? No, I am not. So I don't know if Alex is. But that has been our talking point on this broadly, is that Seattle and cities in Washington already have a process that is provided to them by the state of Washington to do this. And Moorhead, and Alex, can you speak to this? Otherwise, I can pull up Katie Topinka's email. Unfortunately, I was provided these talking points and have forgotten.
Are you spouting talking points on the Wedge Live podcast?
I sure am. It's really important because I don't want to sound like an idiot, which is probably. But Moorhead did do an AUAR, but it was part of a project, right? Like there was a project already.
I believe so. But what I'll just say is that there's a lot that's sneaking in under this. First of all, environmental review can mean a lot of different things, right? And as Peggy Sue argued, and I believe as well, comprehensive plans are a type of environmental review, or at the very least, they're a type of environmental document. Now, you can do an environmental review of the Minneapolis Comprehensive Plan. What I would do is I would take a look at the 2040 plan, and I would look at the 2030 plan, and I would look in the abstract at like-for-like language. What does one plan say about stormwater? What does the other plan say about stormwater? And I would gauge, based on that analysis, which plan is better for the environment. Now, you could do that kind of abstract review, and that would be pretty applicable to a comprehensive plan. It has no precedent in Minnesota history, but if the state legislature, instead of exempting comprehensive plans from MIRA or exempting comprehensive plan density from MIRA, decided, actually, this is a good idea, let's create a new type of environmental review for comprehensive plans, I think that would not necessarily be great government, but it would solve the issue that we're talking about here. Like, at least there would be clarity about what to do in this situation.
Alex, we should really just give it to a district court judge who has no idea what he's doing and let him sort it out. That's been incredibly frustrating for me, and I'm mostly ignorant about this stuff. You two are professionals, and I don't know how closely you're following the court battle, but I read some of the judge's decisions. I'm like, this guy has never attended one planning commission meeting. He doesn't know what he's talking about. It seems like it upsets me that this is being decided in court. And I guess there's a lot of things like this that get decided in court by a non-expert judge, and it pisses people off, but it's frustrating to me.
This is not a legal argument, but it is very frustrating. The disparate standards of evidence that are being required of both sides here. Now, what happened was the plaintiffs in this case they retained a consultant for litigation, an engineering firm, and that engineering firm produced a slapdash environmental assessment, which basically said, if you look only at the residential and actually only at the triplex part of the 2040 plan as a silo, and pay no attention to the other parts of the plan, then building all of these triplexes tomorrow would cause environmental damage. Well, maybe actually, but that's such an absurd hypothetical, and it misreads the 2040 plan. Now, that analysis, for legal reasons, I guess, has and maybe bad lawyering on the city's side in not rebutting that initially, right? But that analysis has been the court's touchstone in this case. None of the analysis that's baked into the 2040 plan itself, which is significantly weightier, analysis from both the city's environmental experts and the Met Council's environmental experts, none of that analysis has counted for nearly as much as this sort of slapdash environmental, white paper, basically by the consultants hired for litigation. It's very frustrating to me. I didn't go to law school, so I can't tell you why the judge has decided to view it that way. But I agree.
Well, I guess even if you went to law school, you can apparently attend a House hearing and just decide that you're an environmental lawyer at will.
Who are we talking about? Who are we talking about now?
I don't know. Some attorney who came on the House hearing and then sat down and was like, I'm an environmental lawyer. And we were like, since when?
Well, the lawyer for the plaintiffs, it's important to note in every case here, or in every instance here, that the lawyer for the plaintiffs is a gentleman named Jack Perry, who is well known for having as one of his clients Northern Metals, the infamous polluting recycler in North Minneapolis. Now, it's true that Jack Perry is
He's an environmental.
He's an environmental lawyer. He just normally takes the position against the environment, and he is doing so here as well, despite what he tells you.
Also pig farms.
Yeah.
If you've ever watched Mythbusters, they often use pigs as a human analog when they're testing various violent impacts that could affect the human body. I think Jack Perry is a pig farm lobbyist and lawyer. It's like pigs, humans, human population growth, same as pigs.
I mean, truly, God, what a dark part of my testimony in the last few weeks was Jack Perry getting up there and being like, just use the same thing you use for swine. Sir, what? And then I looked like a freaking idiot because I was like, well, that process doesn't exist, which like I was right. And then I wish I had been like, I was right.
It's pee and poop. Just
pee
like
and
the comp plan.
Pee and poop. Pee and poop. But literally,
I want to answer the Moorhead question.
Okay, I'm going to go back to Moorhead. Moorhead literally was 3 AUARs of specific projects that was included in the comp plan. So this is again like where it's like people don't know what they're talking about, but they like know enough to like weaponize it, right? Which is like, well, Moorhead used an AUAR, and it's like, no, Moorhead included existing AUARs in their comprehensive plan. That is common. Like I have worked for cities that like in advance of development do this AUAR process, which AUARs, different than an EIS or other environmental processes, are a wider, more broad, kind of squishy way to measure environmental impact. But what is important about that is that when you do the AUAR, you set limits, right? So you say like in this, and they're big areas usually. So it's like in this 150 acre development, we're going to set a limit of 1,200 housing units are going to go in this, right? Then you measure the environmental impact of those again. And this is where it's not like an EIS where like, or an EAW where you have like a specific building form that you're measuring. You're using something like broader. But then when you go to develop, right, you don't have to do the environmental impact because you've already done the like area wide urban review. Not me being like, what's AUAR stand for?
Alternative urban area review.
Alternative, thank you. And so it's a way, and especially in more like rural areas, this is a more common form of review because it cuts down on the development cost on the back end, right? So a city will often say, we have this huge piece of land, we're curious about what it would look like in development, we're going to do this AUAR. You do the AUAR, and then when a developer comes in, it already has set guidelines of saying, like, within this range of housing developments, traffic patterns, whatever, you're good to go.
But to be
right?
clear, you are still a discrete area. Like an AUAR, yes. The best way I can explain it is an EIS is for like a specific office building, and an AUAR is for an office park, basically.
Yes. But not even, and look, it's not even, at that point, it's probably not even an office.
Right. It can be speculative, which
yes.
You could see the legislature saying we want to build off an AUAR to create a new vehicle for comprehensive plans. But again, it is a discrete area, and it is never like the size of an entire city. I mean, you could maybe do one for landfall, for Hilltop.
Yeah.
The city of Minneapolis is insane.
I think we need to emphasize that no city in the history of zoning has ever fully built out their zoning code. Like, it doesn't happen. Like, it never happens. Yeah. This is such a stupid conversation. As we were talking about earlier about how speculative this is, like the housing could go here, could go there. Like, it's up to you. Maybe this landowner doesn't want to sell, and he never will, and this one will. Any number of factors. People aren't just going to build up on every lot. It's like looking at a hurricane forecast map and saying, what if the hurricane hits every part of the cone simultaneously? It's very dumb.
Well, this is a good. Sorry, Peggy. This is a good entry to a second confusion or a real difficulty we have right now, which is that the district court has enjoined the entire 2040 plan, but the plaintiffs have only basically focused on the triplex portion. So the 2040 plan is enjoined, as far as anyone knows, for downtown as well, right? And this is the focus on the triplex has been a wedge that the plaintiffs have used to challenge the entire plan. because it is sort of insane to join the entire plan based on the triplexes. The triplexes are speculative in location. We have no idea how many there will be or which parcels they'll be on. But the plan gets even more speculative when you get into like downtown Minneapolis. You could build tomorrow, get zoning permissions for the Burj Khalifa in downtown Minneapolis. There's no height limit in downtown Minneapolis. And you could do it on Minneapolis City Hall, that site, right? Because
You could do
that
10 of
site,
them. You could do 10 of them, 100 of them.
that site is not zoned for like City Hall only zoning, right? It has the same, because this good planning practice is to, what if City Hall burns down or gets hit by a meteor? Let's think about what can be built there, right? So these sites are treated the same, but from the prescriptive, let's make the maximum allowed be something we have to evaluate for every parcel in the city approach, it really breaks down when you start looking at like downtown Minneapolis or wherever, where it's just like, what can be built there? Infinity. How do we evaluate that? We can't.
Well, and I think the other piece of this, right, from like an environmental perspective of like the argument from the plaintiffs is the environment. We're worried about the trees and the birds, right? Like birds is how this started. RIP to like the poor Audubon Society getting involved in this, who like it says they don't want it in anymore, right? But Minneapolis has grown by, I think the fact that we keep saying occasionally is like Minneapolis has grown by 50,000 people, but GHGs have gone down. Like
traffic has gone down.
Right, so like traffic has gone down and GHGs have gone down.
Much of it under the
measurably
2030 plan, environmental disaster that was.
Yeah, and so like when we add density, right? Like this is planning 101 for anyone listening to this podcast. When you add density and you create like more urban areas, people have to drive less, right? Like when you can walk to the coffee shop instead of drive, when you can walk to the grocery store or the pharmacy instead of driving, we reduced vehicle miles traveled, right? And so that is like one of the best ways for us to stop polluting the environment. And this is the other component of this that we want to preserve for not just Minneapolis, looking broadly at the 7-county metro, is we want to reduce sprawl as much as possible. We want to have people not be forced to move outside of Minneapolis because they can't find housing. So they move to St. Louis Park, and then people who are likely to move into St. Louis Park over Minneapolis say, oh my gosh, now I have to move to Chanhassen, and someone who would live in Chanhassen is now living in Belle Plaine, right? And that is the like trickle-down effect of like people have preferences. Not everyone wants to live in Minneapolis. That is absolutely their right and choice. And so, but what happens is that when someone who can't find housing in Minneapolis has to move to St. Louis Park, like we start to push people out further and further to the burbs when we lack housing choice in their first preference for where they'd like to live, whether that's suburban or urban. And what that happens is then the Belle Plaines, the Ramseys, the Daytons build sprawly housing that contributes to vehicles miles traveled, increasing.
Because a lot of people are still driving to the urban core, even if they live further out.
Or they are someone who would prefer to live in Eden Prairie, maybe somewhere that is like even mildly walkable, but they can't afford it. And so now they live in like more rural Shakopee, right? And then are driving to Eden Prairie, right? Or like, even if they're not driving all the way to Minneapolis, when we put people in these big sprawling housing developments, they have less choice of ways. They have less safe bike routes. They have less access to, sidewalks or trails, right? And so it has this compounding effect where we spread that out. And in these communities where they may have more litigious residents, they are going to be planning in the safest way possible to avoid lawsuit under MIRA.
I'm glad PeggySue mentioned that which we get so in the weeds so quickly, we forget the key fact of this case is that the density that is planned for is more environmentally friendly. We can't let the plaintiffs have any ground on that argument because they're wrong. What they want to do is focus on the political boundaries of Minneapolis, as if that is the only frame of analysis. But the key thing to say repeatedly, again and again, is that housing markets, transportation, it's regional. And what happens in Minneapolis, if a greater percentage of the region's population moves into Minneapolis, we know that greenhouse gas emissions overall, stormwater impacts overall, the loss of farmland, the loss of forest land, the loss of prairie land will decrease, right? All of these environmental stressors will go down if the population of the Twin Cities metropolitan area is more efficiently concentrated, right? Occupies less land. Now, as planners, right, if people want to live in Chaska, they can live in Chaska, right? Every community should be able to realize the vision for their community as best as they see it. I mean, this is not this. No one is asking for the city of Minneapolis to write the comprehensive plans of Plymouth or anywhere else, right? Every community is writing its own plan. We get that, but we need to be very clear here about the meritlessness of the underlying environmental argument that's being made. And there's a reason why this fix is supported by every serious environmental organization in the state. The two plaintiffs in this case are Smart Growth Minneapolis, which has never adopted a single environmental cause in the lifetime as an organization. They were created as a vehicle for this lawsuit. And the other environmental group, the second plaintiff on this case, is an organization that was created to protest the Viking Stadium lack of bird-safe glass. Now, that's a decent point, but they're not experts in greenhouse gas emissions. They're not experts in farmland or forest or prairie preservation or anything else.
And I will say, like, this, again, this compounding effect is like, yes, housing choice, right? And personal vehicle miles traveled. But this also is a compounding effect on like many other issues, like GHG issues, right? So like when suburban and exurban areas face market pressures on farmland, not only do we lose farmland, right? But then farmland, like many of these people are active farmers, but now their land is just so valuable. How could they not sell, right? And so they would like to still be farmers, right? It's not enough for them to like retire and never farm again. And so they're moving their farms further out, right? And so now our food is grown even further away, requiring even more vehicle miles traveled for that food to make its way back to urban areas. And so when we talk about this with greater Minnesota legislators who like this has a greater Minnesota component that like I could talk about for days too, and are concerned about how this impacts planners in greater Minnesota, but this eats into farmland, right? And it eats into like so many natural resources, but like the more that we compress where we grow and raise like food and livestock is really concerning and has its own environmental impacts beyond just that people are also living further away.
I don't want to finish this episode without pointing to another thing from that Susan Dew article in the Star Tribune where I believe it's Jack Perry, the swine lobbyist. They pointed to a 2018 podcast interview with then City Council President Lisa Bender, who said, "We probably would have been prevented from voting on our plan if we would have had to do an environmental impact assessment." This has been distorted as if she meant to say, like, we never would have gotten away with the 2040 plan if we'd had to do the environmental assessment. What she's really saying is the point of these environmental concerns here is to delay. We would have been delayed, kept from voting on the plan if this had been possible. And it's been proven out by what has happened since is endless delay. I mean, is there any other way to interpret what she said other than like they would have delayed the hell out of this?
No, I think that's exactly what she meant. This lawsuit was filed before the final vote in the city council. It's important to recognize that. Their initial attempt was to prevent the city council from voting on this lawsuit. Now, Judge Klein, the judge in this case, denied them initially, and rightly so. And he initially did rule for the city, by the way, until the Supreme Court overturned it. So I think that right. I agree. I think that is an odd point because what Jack Perry means is that he wasn't able to get away with his dilatory tactics initially.
Here's another thing. We had so many years of evidence from the triplex change, the low density zoning, upzoning from single family to triplex. Like, what did it produce? Hundreds of units over the course of like the 3 or 4 years that it was in effect.
Yeah,
and so
many. I mean, there's a funny resolution to this case, potential resolution that we'll see if the Court of Appeals adopts. But the one of the weird tricks of the environmental white paper, let's say, that the plaintiffs produced was that they measured the impacts of 150,000 new triplexes instantaneously in Minneapolis compared with 0. And they concluded that there would be environmental damage in that latter scenario. And what the city has said is, okay, we'll accept that conclusion. The court can limit Minneapolis to permitting only 100,000 triplexes, which of course, that is not going to happen, which they know, and it's the reason why the plaintiffs have rejected that conclusion, because even though no one can say it explicitly, what the plaintiffs are arguing is that every triplex on a per unit basis does environmental harm. But they don't have a fake study to justify that kind of conclusion. But that's what they think, and the city has sort of taken that invitation, that sort of gap of between 0 and 150,000, and said, oh, what if we agree to limit ourselves to some absurd number that's not 150,000, and it would be funny. And if the Court of Appeals wants to resolve the lawsuit in Minneapolis' favor without completely wasting everyone's time or embarrassing the district court judge, they could potentially order a resolution on those grounds. They didn't seem at the hearing like they wanted to go in that direction, but that is an option that's available.
And I will say also the other hilarious potential resolution here, which would be, I don't even think we'll know what to do with, is that there is an active statewide zoning bill introduced right now, right? Which would legalize up to 7 units. Right?
6,
Am I right with that?
Yeah,
Alex?
for cities of the first class like Minneapolis on many parcels. And it would set a floor of like duplexes plus an ADU across the state, right? So
I mean, that is also a component here, is like, this is a MIRA solution, is that like, and then at that point, does Smart Growth Minneapolis sue the state of Minnesota?
I think we're about to find out if you can do a MIRA claim against an entire bill.
I'm guessing they're going to write in an exemption for themselves if they pass this bill. Does it not say explicitly, like, you can't sue us under MIRA?
No, but maybe we should suggest that to the authors.
It's kind of an oversight if you think about it.
Yeah. I mean, and I think that's just like where this is, like, I think it's really funny to me, actually, like the Venn diagram of people who are like, yeah, statewide single family zoning, let's kill it. And the people who hate this MIRA change is a circle. Like literally the same people who are like, I'm not voting for MIRA are like, I'm going to definitely vote to get rid of statewide single family zoning. And so that's just been an interesting experience so far in the past few weeks, is just being like, you understand these two things functionally do the same thing, right? But I do think that that's something that we'll be watching for too as an organization, is just trying to figure out, like, what do we do if that passes but MIRA fails, right? We haven't explicitly said this even on the podcast. We're like, how many minutes in? The APA Minnesota has heavily involved in a legislative change championed by Senator Omar Fateh, who, like, shout out forever. Friend of the pod, Chris Meyer, has also been a big component of getting this moving forward. But, we've been, Alex and I, poor sweet Alex, in Vienna, like on trains, planes, buses, hotel rooms, has helped us with some testimony and getting this, our membership engaged, hopefully anyone who's paying attention to this issue engaged in trying to legislatively fix this, kind of assuming that the courts are never going to figure this out or never going to be knowledgeable enough to really understand this issue enough to fix it. So, we are basically asking the state to change in MIRA that residential density alone is not something that people can sue over. As Alex said earlier, it is every environmental organization, but championed by the Sierra Club, is saying we need to make this change because the most environmentally sound thing we can do is build dense housing.
Join up with all the real environmental organizations against the fake ones in support of this change. Also, this has been discussed on Twitter. These names have been thrown out, so I'm not revealing anything secret, but it's Senators Champion and Zietzik that I have heard are the problems.
They're not the only ones. I'm
They're not
sorry,
the
this
only
is
ones?
terrible radio, but I need to plug in my computer charger. I'll be back in a moment.
You can't just drop.
They're
You
not the
can't
only
just
ones.
drop something like "they're not the only ones" and go fix your charger.
They're not the only ones. You know, this needs Republican support, which is why it's like funny to me that the people
Does
who
it?
oppose Mira are like, I think it does at some point, like needs some amount of Republicans. This is like inside
Because some
baseball that I don't
DFLers are
know how
not
to play.
supporting it,
I don't know.
and perhaps those
This is weird,
DFLers are the
Alex.
ones I mentioned.
So Dietzick, I will give grace to and say that I think she is quite ill. So I don't know that this has really anything to do with her feelings on the bill as much as she's quite sick. Champion and I had a rough phone call where I wish I had not had it because I don't think I was.
Well,
super
don't say
helpful.
anything that's going to hurt our chances here, Peggy Sue. I'm not asking you to get controversial.
I'm not. I'm saying like I was like advocating and he was like no fucking way and I was like I shouldn't have called you. I'm so sorry.
I think that I'm sorry for stepping away, but I think the point is that we need people to keep making the case. I get very frustrated when talking about this, and it feels very obvious to me, and I think to all of us, but it's not to people. They're not steeped in this. There's a lot of context that's missing. There are a lot of parts of this that, why can't you just do an environmental review, right? It's a question that requires some technical knowledge or trust of people with technical knowledge to answer. And so, we need people to get engaged on this issue because, and I think part of the problem as well is that it is, it has been so dominated by Minneapolis's problems. And we've talked on this podcast about this lawsuit and so on and Minneapolis's problems. But again, if we do not resolve this issue in a workable way, then it will not be Minneapolis's problem for long. I mean, it really won't. This is a precedent that is a landmine for comprehensive planning throughout the metropolitan area. And that's a lot of cities and towns. It's St. Paul, it's Woodbury, it's Burnsville, it's Maple Grove. I mean, every corner of the metropolitan area is at risk of a sort of judicial precedent that I would consider to be completely run amok.
And also just the idea, right? Like this has planted the idea for greater Minnesota residents who say like, I don't like what the city's doing. I don't want to do that. And like, even though they're not legally required to comprehensively plan, lots of greater Minnesota cities do this planning exercise, right? As a way to engage residents in development, as to, plan for and kind of control growth. And so, if I'm, Joe Schmo in greater Minnesota who says like, I hate apartment buildings because I hate renters. And I've seen this lawsuit in Minneapolis. Maybe I'm thinking it might be kind of spicy for me to sue the city, right? And say, I don't want that. And so can they sue under MIRA in the same way that Smart Growth Minneapolis is suing the city of Minneapolis? No, but they might feel like this is a great argument to bring forward. And I think that they can probably find a way to make a lawsuit work. And that is really detrimental to cities across Minnesota, which is why we've seen the League of Minnesota Cities come on board with us in advocating for this bill, is because even though the League, last year was not as supportive of it, because I think that we didn't do as good of a job kind of explaining the issue as we have this year. This year they've said like, yeah, we actually do see how this could impact cities across the state, and we are going to get engaged in it.
My argument to the legislature is you spent, what was it, billions of dollars did they allocate last year for housing? Yeah. And this year, we won't do anything about the housing supply. Are we really not going to do anything that allows us to build more of that housing? Because I can't live under a pile of money. People have to live in like physical buildings that we build in our cities. So like, don't throw money at a problem that you're not actually willing to fix with physical structures that need to be like planned for and built.
John, are you revealing you don't live under a pile of
money? I
don't.
Peggy Sue has bled me dry with her Etsy shenanigans, buying through the ad link.
Would you live under a pile of money if I hadn't stolen $5
Maybe I
from
would.
you?
Maybe I would. Piles of $100 bills, just stacks and stacks. I would build a home out of it. Because the legislature won't let me live in a physical building.
In 20 years, John's going to be like, well, that $5 I should have made, it could have been $400,000 by
That's
now.
my retirement, PeggySue.
And I'm going to say, it's okay, John, and wheel you back into your room.
It's a precarious life as an influencer here, like a hyper-local influencer. It's very precarious. So please.
What I was going to say, sorry.
Actually, I'm not sorry. I didn't fucking do anything.
Let's let Alex finish here.
What I was going to say is that, normally at the legislature and on these topics, there is a conflict between local control on one side and the sort of pro-housing movement, housing supply movement on the other, where we have state preemption. Now, that's not the case in this issue. Local control and housing density are aligned, right, in favor of this legislation. And the state control is not opposed. The other side of the ledger is not state control. The other side of the ledger is judicial control. So, there's a question here. Who should be controlling the land use of our cities and towns, especially in the metro area? Is it democratically elected local officials guided by nonpartisan local staff who are in turn guided by community engagement? Or is it a group of angry people, a minority of angry people who've gotten the ear of a judge? Right?
Just a random Paulenti appointee in the district court should definitely be the one deciding this.
I think that there's an element here where the legislature, as PeggySue mentioned, the sort of discordance between on one side we have a bill to statewide preempt a lot of local control, and whatever issues or benefits you see in that, that is still another form of democratic control, because it's rules that are promulgated by the state legislature, who are democratically elected representatives. What we have here is a case where control has been usurped, not by anyone with any kind of democratic legitimacy at all, but by an appointed judge. And we've talked through the policy part of this, but this is a good governance issue at its heart. This is a good governance issue.
Well, and also, this is my favorite fun fact, because I always love to make this lawsuit racist, right? Because it is. And I haven't got to do it enough this legislature session. But for the most part, duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes are rental housing, right? Now, Representative Jordan, loves this legislation because she owns a unit in a fourplex. And, yes, there are home ownership opportunities that exist in this style of housing that are also very necessary. But because of condo legislation, right, that's typically not what's getting built. A lot of times what's getting built is, and maybe more so on, the duplex side of things, but when we get, past 2 units, a lot of times this is rental housing, right? And what we know demographically in the entire 7-county metro is that in 80% of BIPOC residents rent their homes, right? So when we say, I do not want a duplex, triplex, whatever, next to my home, what we're actually saying is that we do not want residents who rent next to my home. And when the vast majority of residents who rent are people of color, we do not want people of color next to my home. And that is something that is so infuriating to me about both who comes and yells about how BIPOC people feel the burden of environmental impact, right? When we're actively fighting something that would improve the environment. And when we talk about providing housing for our BIPOC neighbors, and we say we don't want rental housing, we don't want this type of rental housing, that is who suffers in that scenario. And so there is an element, a very, very heavy, especially when we think about the neighborhoods that don't want this, right? There's a very, very heavy racism argument here that is happening, that I don't think, this is where Senator Champion and I were could not see eye to eye, because he was real focused on home ownership. And that's sort of irrelevant to this as a concept. But when we don't want rental housing we inherently do not want people of color. And so based on who lives in rental housing in the Twin Cities. And so that is just like a really shitty side effect of this. Like beyond the environmental piece of this is that we tell people who rent, and especially people of color who rent, that they are not welcome in Minneapolis with this lawsuit.
I've lost control of this episode. It's gone way longer than anyone is willing to listen to about the intricacies of environmental law and comprehensive planning and this legislative session. So I think we have to cut it short. Do either of you have recommendations you'd like to offer people very quickly?
Get involved, please. Please message your
contact the legislature.
I mean, don't just because they're a DFL or whomever, or just because they're a Republican, don't write them off or take them for granted either way, right? Just please call is best, but email is second best. Personal email that's not a spammy thing. Get in touch.
Make a phone call. Make a phone call, because if they hear your voice, you are more real to them than a form email.
Yeah. My only recommendation is buy something directly from the Etsy store.
Yeah, don't go through the ad.
Yeah.
Wedge Live's future solvency depends on it. Thank you to Alex Schieferdecker, PeggySue Imihy Bean, president of the Minnesota chapter of the American Planning Association. This is the Wedge Live podcast. I'm your host, John Edwards. Thank you for listening.
This is a real thing. Real thing.
None of you have the balls to stop this. Stop this.
I've got plenty of time. I have nothing else going on today.
We're in the Wedge neighborhood right now.